Hello, we can't hear anything. Hello, we can't hear anything on Zoom.
This one, we want this one. Okay, can the people hear us now?
Can you hear us now on Zoom?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. I'm not
Okay.
gonna touch it.
No, we're
Okay.
good. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So back to 1994. I applied for an exchange to go to Germany for 10 months. So I embark on this 10-month odyssey to Heidelberg in Germany, where I meet this person, Georg Bach, and he showed me sort of gave me a different view on how mathematics could interact with industry. He ran a rather large operation, right? Lots of money, lots of projects, contracts, GASP, deliverables, okay? Lots of meetings with people in suits. But it was my first real exposure to how, it might be done, how mathematics could interact with industry. And it was quite I like to think that I modeled myself after, what I saw there. And yeah, I mean, I think that it was a very eye-opening experience, shall we say. We didn't really do this in Canada, and arguably we kind of still don't do it today, not in the same way, and perhaps it's to the same degree, even though things do exist. So the next lesson in our saga here is that we, don't overthink it. Okay, so this is when you're working on an industrial math problem, one of the first things to not do is overthink it. So here we are back in 1998. Okay, I was an assistant professor at Acadia University, and there was a company at the time that designed web pages, right? So again, in 1997, this was like, what's up with that, right? And they wanted to, they were collecting survey data, and they said, well, can you do some linear regression for us? Oh, that's cool. I can do linear regression, right? So at the time, of course, I was ready to go with, well, we all know that, QR decomposition is the way to do linear regression, and that we don't really want to do normal equations, right? We know that the SAT system has a condition number that goes at the square of the condition number of A, so we don't want to do that. But of course, that's not really what the customer wanted at the time, but that was overkill, was too much for them. And, so that project was not necessarily one of the most successful ones that I had, but, those were early days. And I guess the point of the matter is that, so these stories that I tell are they're precursors in a way to them repeating later on. So I'm not going to tell you all the stories, but the little nuggets that I throw out there have been repeated, and you will sort of see, if you're good at detecting patterns, which most people are, you'll see that different themes occur in several different contexts. And this one where people like to, especially smart people who think quickly, they like to keep going to the next step without sort of stopping and saying, what do I really need? And do I need more than this, or is this enough? And so you'll get to that in a second, but So again, the point here is that you didn't really need the QR decomposition, even though in some sense it's the right thing to do. So you kind of have to, hold yourself back from doing what you really think is the right thing and just do the thing that works, if you will. So you keep running with the idea until it stops working is another way to say that. So same sort of thing, right? Customer is always right. If you were in business, you'd hear this. Math, maybe not so much. So in, I think it was 2005, I just moved to Saskatchewan, just started there as an associate professor. I get, contacted by a group. Oh, we need to solve, 20,000 linear systems. And our code is really slow. It takes us all night to solve. I'm thinking, cool, this is a real problem, right? I'm wondering, do they have any do they have access to parallel computing? I was just started up as the director of high performance computing center in Saskatchewan. What kind of access to computers do they have? I said, okay, what can you tell me about the matrix A? Do you know anything about the matrix A? Does it have any special properties? No, nothing. I said, okay. Well, what method are you using now? Jacobi iteration. Well, no, fair enough, fair enough. Jacobi iteration. I said, okay, well, maybe we can do better than this, right? But then my next question was, well, so they said, yeah, sometimes it takes all night and sometimes doesn't converge. And I actually did run their code. And in fact, it was true. It ran all night and sometimes didn't converge. And I said, okay, well, how big are your systems? And they said, well, they're all 3 by 3. I love a math audience, right? It's the only place you can get a laugh from the punchline being, it was 3 by 3. Okay, anyway. Again, so my reaction was the same. In 2006, it was like, wait, what now? Of course, we didn't talk like that in 2006, but I think you get the point. So, even back then, MATLAB's backslash, which is again about well, I'm not gonna say it's the dumbest thing you could do, but it's the thing that you need to think least about in order to implement, would run in a few minutes, pretty much problem solved. Oops. So, so the punchline here is that the customer is always right until they're not, right? You have to this is up to you to sort of suss out, if you will. And then at that point, you can tell them what do they want, yeah? Okay, so it's at that point where you should really sort of step in and say, you know what, let's do it this way instead. And with some data, they usually will back that, even though maybe necessarily they don't understand exactly what you're doing, but they don't have to. You show them the data and you convince them that you understand what's going on. And that's usually a good formula for success. Okay, so the next lesson is, be what you need to be. So industrial mathematics, according to me, is a team sport, right? There's many moving parts in here. And, I'm sure you're all familiar with this concept, right? If you're a faculty or student, or it doesn't matter who you are many different things at many different times, mentor, coach, or my personal favorite, janitor, right? You're all of these things. And frankly, I'm maybe not nurse, right? So I actually did have an intern student of mine break his leg just last week. So, but normally I'm not nurse because this is not a contact sport, fortunately. But, when you're on a team, are you the linear algebra person, right? Are you the linear systems person? So I always consider myself a Runge-Kutta person. I do time integration, and not just time integration, I do it with Runge-Kutta, right? So very specific. But oftentimes you find yourself on these teams, you're the linear algebra person. Guess what, right? So some of my friends would say, there's no way, we should have revoked his card that says he's a linear algebra person. But, sometimes you have to be. Other times you are the ODEs person. Whoops. Other times you're the PDEs person. Other times you're the optimization person. So the bottom line here is that you do what you need to do so that the team can move forward, make progress on the problem. This is what people want to see. So lest you think that, this life of industrial mathematics is all glamour, let me assure you it is not. So it certainly is not all roses. And these are stories that, again, I'll harken back to Frithjof talking about elephants in the room. I don't even know if we know these are elephants, but they happen. And so I think it's important that, I share this just because if it happens to you, you can say, gee, it happened to that guy and he's on stage now. So maybe it's not such a bad thing that it happened to me. Well, here we are back in 1990. I'm sorry, I need to think about this for a second. Here we are back in 1998. So I'm now a postdoctoral fellow at McGill, working with Chris Page and Xiaowen Chan, linear algebra guys, right? So I get to wear the hat. I think this is where they gave me the license at some point to call myself that without them getting too upset. This was my first sort of hands-on experience. I mean, when I was in Germany, I was more of an observer than a participant, mostly because I didn't speak the language, I guess. But at McGill, I was actually formally on the job for a little while. We worked with a company called Canadian Marconi, and you may have heard of them, you may not. But at the time, right? At the time, we were working on GPS. This was right when Strang published his book on GPS. And of course, at that time, you could stop somebody on the street and say, do you know what GPS stands for? Today, they probably still would say no, but at least now they know they've got one in their pocket, right? Or at least I think. Whereas in those days, you wouldn't know what GPS stood for. And in fact, the problem that we were working on was to be able to use this sort of new, because it was still fairly newfangled at that point in time, a GPS system to be able to land planes without human intervention. So in zero visibility, without any intervention at all. And it was sort of a fault detection and isolation type problem that we were working on. What if one of your satellites starts giving you faulty data? How can you detect that? How can you eliminate that? And how can you still land the plane safely and not kill anybody? So this was some, fairly serious stuff. So this was towards the end of my postdoc, and Canadian Marconi got taken over by British Aerospace. So that was kind of it for the project. It happens, right? So to their credit, Chris and Xiaowen, continued on with the research. I moved east. So at the time that I moved on to Acadia. But, that's it. It just, stuff like that happens and you can't sort of get too upset by it. We'll see some of the other lessons basically express this sentiment as well. But I've got a few more roses or ain't roses to show you. So yeah, most projects, okay, so it does happen that, corporate takeover is what terminates a project. That can happen, but that's not really the norm. So that happened, again, for the first real project I was in. I don't really believe it's ever happened since. So again, that's just a data point for you. Here's a little more of a reason. And that's, the team, right? It's kind of a triad. There's the faculty member, there's the partner, and there's the trainee. And while me being the faculty member doesn't like to say that I've never not shown up for the job, but when you've got a lot of people in a lot of different situations, yeah, you can have people who just don't show up, to put it to you that way. Okay, so when they don't, this is an outcome that nobody wants, but it happens, right? So the partner isn't as interested as they thought they were. Like they talk a good game, but then when push comes to shove, they're not that interested. You have, trainees who, again, say they're interested. But it happens to other faculty members too. I mean, certainly people collaborate and all, people can't do everything, right? They have great aspirations and then reality strikes and they don't necessarily, they aren't necessarily able to follow through, even though they may have good intentions. So, that happens. And the truth of the matter, and this is, I think, the most common one, is that, the partners don't have infinitely deep pockets, or if the pockets are deep, unfortunately, they're also empty. And so that doesn't help. Okay. So this has happened on a few occasions, right? All the paperwork is signed, everything is ready to go. We just need the damn money. And it doesn't happen, right? Whose fault is it? Well, it's nobody's fault really, because I don't think people go into it with malintent, but it happens. And you just have to roll with it. Okay, so that is, the next lesson. And it's important to, take life as it comes and deal with it. So I've mentioned already a few curveballs that you can see, but there are more, right? So this, I think, somehow came out of the talk again this morning. This is a very, I guess, paraphrased quote. I'm not sure that Darwin actually used the words in this particular order. So not a literal quote, but the gist of it still applies. So this whole survival of the fittest thing is kind of a misnomer. It's not really the fittest, or at least you have to measure fitness by adaptability. And so I think we can get around that. If by fitness you mean adaptability, because that's the important quantity thing that you need to optimize, then that's who survives, right? So in the industrial math world, it is how adaptable are you, right? So if you think that you're going to go in with one, so again, we used the analogy of I have one hammer and everything looks like a nail. Well, yes and no. So if you are able to be in a world where you can turn everything you have to deal with into that nail and hammer on it, good for you. But this is a different world, right? This is a world where, yeah, they're all nails, but they're all different. And you can't use your one hammer on it. You need to try to change, rather than change the problem into your nail, you can change your hammer into the one that you have to. And, so is this, Microsoft Word versus LaTeX? Is this, Python versus C versus Fortran? I promised not to use the F word here, but there you go, I did, right? I know personally, and maybe you feel the same way, I really don't like to use systems that I feel are inferior to the ones I'm already using. Okay, so, right, I'm not the biggest fan of certain systems because I feel like mine are better. But again, you don't necessarily have the choice to do that or the luxury to do that. And so here's just an idea of a simulation that we're doing with my work with the hydrologists. And that is, here's a large swath of the Canadian Rockies, where we've got a mesh north of 32 million cells on it. We're trying to figure out where does the snow go and where does it accumulate. And so we need to distribute that computation over, I don't know, more than 100 nodes. And so you can see on the right how the cells are distributed amongst the cores, right? That's what the different colors mean. And on the left is more or less the mesh. And so one of these is going to be called a spatial discretization. And one of them is going to be called a domain decomposition. And I can tell you which one I would choose to call which. And I can tell you that the hydrologists do it exactly the other way around. So yes, exactly. So your brain has to have this sort of built-in layer of translation where every time they say this, you have to say to yourself, yeah, but they mean that, right? So that, to get it into your own terms. Like, unfortunately, this, for better or worse, I'm one of these people that needs to understand things on their own terms. And, when you deal with, again, you can't change their culture, right? This is how they've evolved. You can't go in there and say, no, I need you to not talk, no, it's not correct. What you're saying is not correct. And this is what you should be doing. That doesn't fly. So roll with it. Now, it may sound to you like, this is pretty hard work, and it is. And so people have ups and downs and they go through different phases, and we're all like that. So what's one way to keep you going, right? Well, keep your eyes on the prize is one way to do it. So we do know that, optimal control tells us if you want to find the optimal solution to a problem, you start at the end and you work backwards, right? So just like when you're little and solving mazes, you start at the end and work your way back to the beginning, right? So in some sense, that is what I mean by keeping your eyes on the prize. So I don't know if this is the best idea to do in real life, but you've got your eyes forward and you're walking backwards, okay? Because there are, what I call the 5 big wins of industrial mathematics. So if you think about, why are you in the game, right? Hopefully it's for all these reasons. You see the trainee grow, right? You see them get experience. You see them get the satisfaction of solving, a real world problem, which, some people are great. They can work, in theory, and that's fine with them, and more power to them. But lots of them also get inspired by what they think is somebody else cares about this problem, not just me. So they work on that. Certainly the industry partner is very happy to have somebody else help them with their problems. Well, the usual suspects, right? The university is happy about these kind of interactions. And certainly the Canadian economy, right? So I'm thinking about just Canada in particular, benefits from this, right? Because the industry has more value and the workforce has more value, right? And they can look at the faculty and say, we're actually getting some value from them too. How about that? So yeah, and the faculty member, of course, we get to work on these cool problems, right? So if you just the sort of, I hope you've gathered from the snippets of the examples that I've given you, right? These are the cutting edge problems, at least for their time. Like you might say, okay, this passé today, but at the time they were, pretty good. And just being able to, be involved is exciting. So I do like to, walk the walk, as they say. So I think it's important in industrial math that out of the triad that everybody leads by example, right? So it's not just the faculty leading by example, but it's good for them to not forget what it was like to be a student. I think that's a very important thing. So you want to lead by example, and I don't think I can, with sort of good faith, give a talk about industrial math in Canada and not mention MyTax, right? So MyTax, once upon a time, and many of you were around at the inception, the M in MyTax used to stand for mathematics. Right now, it's kind of just a word now. MyTax is it's an acronym. It doesn't necessarily stand. It's just a word. It's not even an acronym because it doesn't really stand for anything anymore. It's just it. But it did the M used to stand for mathematics. And last fall, they had a program called the it was called the MyTax MyTax Industrial Faculty Collaboration for Innovation program. It was a pilot program where essentially professors could become interns in their own sort of small way, because obviously I couldn't just let the rest of my job go, even though I was on sabbatical. And so I did this for 3 months last fall. I joined up with a company called Siemens EDA, so electronics design and automation. And they had me, trying to make their solvers go faster. Again, linear system solvers that came out of differential equations, but we didn't quite get to the differential equations part, actually DAEs, differential algebraic equations. We didn't quite get there in the 3 months, but I was looking at, different preconditioners and different ways to make their solvers faster, right? So electronic design, you can imagine it's a cutthroat business, right? So every bit of performance you can squeeze out is worth billions of dollars. And so I was working on that at the time. And I thought it was a great thing. It was only a pilot. And unfortunately, they've discontinued that pilot. So I don't know why. I'm trying to find out. But if any of you are interested in, stirring the pot a little bit and seeing if we can get it reinstated, please let me know. I think it must, I don't know why. I can only speculate that it must have been for lack of uptake. But on the other hand, it could have been for lack of, knowledge, right? For lack of advertising, if you will. So I'd be interested, to hear your, anybody who's interested in following up on that, please let me know. So again, we're getting, to the harder and harder parts here. So communicate. What can I tell you? I can't stress that enough, that, the communication between the different parts, between two entities, is already hard enough. Once you input the third person and, the industry partners, usually there's more than one point of contact. Maybe you have more than one student. It's a lot of hard work to make that happen. It has to happen on many different levels. So for me, here's sort of the triad of the different parts. And for me, the middle of this screen would have all the equations, because again, that's how I like to think of things. So not even the code. I mean, the code, that works on a different level, but it's really the math that helps me understand what the problem is and how to solve it and how we're going about it. But again, it's a lot of hard work. And I think that that's why it breaks down, because it is so effortful to make sure that people are all on the same page. So one thing also to remember, again, if you're looking for some kind of motivation to keep going, I think, industrial mathematics really, it does bring out the fact that you're making a difference. You're making a difference in many different ways. And I will just sort of highlight, back in the day of, I think, when would this have been, like 2001? So there's Colin McDonald, who was my first honor student at the time. And the reason I bring this story up is not necessarily it is for Colin's sake in a way, because he did, go on to do his PhD with Steve Ruth at Simon Fraser, and then on to postdoc at UCLA with Stan Osher, and then finally a few years at Oxford before he landed back here at UBC. But so the story of how we met has to do with industry, because I went to an SCIAM industry workshop where they brought in a panel of industry people, and they said, what do we have to get you? Like, how do we convince you that you should be hiring mathematicians instead of engineers? And they said, what kind of characteristics are you looking for in the people you hire? And they said, well, we want problem solving skills, we want programming skills, we want team players, and we need good communicators. And that was, 20 years ago, still true today. Over the years, as I talk to more and more people, I've added be a self-starter to that list, but that list is still good as gold. If you want to, encourage if you want to prepare your students for what the people are looking for, that's what it is. And, and so when I came back, so the way that the story works is I came back from North Carolina and I was telling, the same story to the group of undergraduates at Acadia. And Colin McDonald was sitting in the very back, and he had, you could tell he was just not buying what I said. He was sort of really into pure math. And he said, this applied math, not worth anything. Nobody believes in it and blah, blah, blah. But then, Tom Archibald went to him afterwards and he said, go and ask that Spiteri guy for a job. Maybe he'll hire you. And I did. And of course, after that, as they say, the rest is history. So that little, experience, if you will, or that little take on industry, I think did change the course of at least, that one person. And there are many more. Like I just had one of my former postdocs. Well, I say that today, but she just started working at MyTax like last Monday. So she's now hired by MyTax. This is how well she knows the system and knows, what it takes to succeed. So I'm getting to the end. I think that this means I'm more or less on time. So the one thing that I often tell my class, if I could put this thing in bright red letters, that's what I would do, right? So this is kind of even though it's lesson 11, not the last one, the relationship, there's really not too much more to say about that. Like, this is how you define success, really. It's not necessarily did you solve the problem, right? So here's everything in red letters as promised. This is, one of the things to keep in mind. You get to decide what is success between you and the other people. This is how, you'll look back on things and say, that was a really good relationship. This was a really good exercise. It was very satisfying. Here's what we accomplished versus here's what we didn't accomplish, right? So it's it allows, I've certainly had many projects that have begun and ended. And then after a number of years, people are back. Hey, Ray, we have this problem now. Are you interested in working on that? And, I credit that. I don't credit to a shortage of people for them to ask, but rather that, I like to think that's because that we worked well together and, we continue to do so, or we would like the chance to do it again. So last but not least, definitely have fun. Again, I hope you believe that I walk the walk, right? So there are many different ways in which I have had fun with this. And I have a couple of students in the audience here, and we're going to have a little fun with you guys as well right now. But thank you all to my travel companions who have been on the journey with me. So you'll recognize some of these faces, past winners of the Industrial Math Prize, so Brian Wetton and John Stocky in particular, but you can see some other people from industry that in the mix. And the Zoom chat is the latest one of my lab meetings, so you can see sort of all the students that we had there. Okay, so we are setting up here. So you remember when I did say that, that whole thing about the billion-dollar eigenvector didn't quite work out? Well, I'm going to see if we can do something that's worth maybe only $1 million. Okay.
Okay.
Are we good? How's the sound, everyone? Sound check, good? Okay.
So if when someone can record this, please send it to me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, it's being, Zoom is on, good. If I had $1 million,
I will buy you a house.
I would buy you a house.
If I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
I'll buy you furniture for your house.
maybe a nice Chesterfield or an ottoman.
If I had $1 million,
I'd buy your love.
if I had $1 million,
I'd build a tree fort in our yard.
if I had $1 million,
You could help, it wouldn't be that hard.
if I had $1 million,
Well, maybe we could put like a little tiny fridge in there or something.
yeah, just some place that we can hang out with the most amazing CAIMS people.
That's right.
here.
Lots of room for everybody.
Yeah, and we'll have pre-wrapped sausages.
Oh, that's right. And the famous pre-wrapped bacon too.
which probably doesn't exist. If I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
I'd buy you a fur coat.
but not a real fur coat, that's cruel.
If I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
I'd buy you an exotic pet.
yep, like a llama or an emu.
If I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
I'll buy you John Merrick's remains.
ooh, all them crazy elephant bones.
If I had $1 million,
I'd buy your love.
If I had $1 million,
We wouldn't have to walk to the store.
if I had $1 million,
We'd take a limousine 'cause it costs more.
if I had $1 million,
We wouldn't have to eat Kraft dinner.
but we will eat craft dinner.
Sure, we'd just eat more.
And we're gonna pair it up with very expensive Okanagan wine.
That's right. It's a whole new meaning to wine and cheese. And of course, the fanciest Dijon ketchups.
$1 million,
If I had $1 million,
I'd buy you a green dress.
but not a real green dress, that's cruel.
If I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
I'd buy you some art.
a Picasso or a Garfunkel.
If I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
I'd buy you a monkey.
haven't you always wanted a monkey?
If I had $1 million,
I'd buy your love. Oh,
If I had $1 million,
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 I'd be rich.
Thank you.
So you really do have to be quite brave to be my student. I do appreciate that. And I'm hoping the whole time that Joyce would just not start laughing and forget what she had to do. And so that all worked out very well. Thank you for your attention.
We have time for some questions. Yes.
Great, thanks for the song, first of all. But where are the papers? Don't
Where?
you write papers in your program?
Okay, so that's a good question. So the short answer is yes. We do write some, but again, the the primary objective for this is not necessarily papers, right? So it depends on the project. We try to publish, of course, the currency for everybody, and this is what I do tell my partners. So I do appreciate the question, is that everybody benefits from publication. But there are certain things that, I don't know, there are certain trade secrets and whatnot that they don't really want to give away as well. So it's really a fine line. And I did not emphasize that at all, but there are publications certainly that come from them for sure.
So in the same spirit, how dangerous is it for non-tenured faculty to try the industrial adventure?
Well, again, what can I tell you? That's an excellent question. Certainly in the classical way of evaluation, you do kind of, but even people who produce software, just as such, kind of get this short shrift versus others. However, if it's any consolation, things at NSERC are at least changing, at least on paper. There's the new DORA system, which I forget exactly what DORA stands for right now, but the idea is that all contributions to research are to be, appreciated, and outreach and things that impact the community or impact, again, the real world are supposed to be valued at least as much as formal scientific publication.
Just make sure that the tenure and promotion committee is.
Well, I hear you. I absolutely hear you. But there is a difference between theory and practice, but what can I say?
Okay, any other question? If there is any question from the audience, from the Zoom audience also, I only see a comment by Hava.
Yes.
Is there any other question? Yes.
I have a question from the.
So you said makeup on mathematicians, like why they were hiring mathematicians over engineers.
No, so why they, well, let me rephrase that as what are the 4 characteristics that they were looking for in hiring?
Right.
Yes, yeah. So problem solving skills, this is an order of my preference in some sense. So problem solving skills, programming skills, being able to be a team player, being a good communicator. And to that, I will add being a good self-starter, right? Which means you can work without constant supervision if you have to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question quickly. Ray, I didn't know you could say it, first of all. That's fantastic.
Well, that's debatable, actually, then.
No, you're fantastic singer. That's very nice. Very nice. But the
Thank
question
you.
I have is how much of statistics your work involves, actually? Because some of these problems you work with in industry are typically large and
Right. So the question was, how much statistics do I do in this work? So
how much,
a lot of it,
much data
it does get done. I tend to not do it. So these are, again, other people on the team. I never put down, you'll notice I avoided being the statistics person because I think the project would be kind of in trouble if I'm your statistic person, but you know how that is. But it certainly you do it because you have to.
No, because they do the industrial design, right? They do the sampling and how to automate their processes using this really cool statistical techniques. So that's very nice.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Right. Okay, I think we can.
Yeah, that's good.
Let's stay for a moment.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say, so please, when you're in the classroom, make sure you're using the classroom camera and video. So hosts, please make sure that the Zoom call is hooked up through the HDMI to the classroom camera and audio so that the Zoom people can see and hear. And speakers, please use your mouse. The Zoom people can't see you pointing at the screen. So use your mouse, then everybody can see. That's it. Thank you.
Hi, Awa.
Hi, Thomas.
Bring the board here.
Yeah, we need to wait a few minutes before people have sorted and so on. I'll let you know. Dominic, yeah, just need to help me to get this.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sorted, Rebecca.
Hello. Okay, so we want to get out, so escape. Oh, my goodness, no.
This is why she's running the session.
Yeah, okay. Why isn't this escaping? Ah, shoot. Okay, so I just want to,
Oh, this is still on the camera.
yeah, I'm trying to, so I'm trying to. Okay, I'm just gonna close Zoom and restart. Okay,
We're coming back.
okay, I'm gonna close and restart because I don't know what's going on.